The fall of Nicolas Maduro was loud, televised, decisive, but what comes after is quieter and far more dangerous, because removing a dictator is the easy part. Choosing who replaces him is where power really fights back. This week, President Donald Trump celebrated a US-backed operation in Venezuela, yet in the same breath, he cast doubt on María Corina Machado, questioning her support, questioning her legitimacy. That hesitation matters. In Florida, Republican lawmakers heard something very different. They heard uncertainty, and they don't agree. For years, they have treated Venezuela not as a foreign policy footnote, but as a moral mission, a cause tied to exile, memory, and democracy unfinished. So when the White House hesitates, Florida pushes back. And suddenly the real conflict isn't in Caracas, it's inside the American right. If you want to understand where this story is truly headed, stay with me. Because this isn't about one country, it's about how transitions collapse or succeed. And that question begins next. The question now is not what happened, it is what happens next. Because Venezuela is entering the most fragile phase of any political rupture, the transition. On paper, the objective seems simple: remove Maduro, restore democracy, hold elections. But reality is never linear. Inside Venezuela, power has not vanished. It has shifted, temporarily resting with acting authorities, while opposition figures remain fragmented, displaced, or operating from abroad. And this is where the disagreement sharpens. The White House is focused on immediacy, stability, preventing bloodshed, managing the short term. Florida Republicans are focused on legitimacy, clarity, a recognizable democratic face. To them, the transition has a destination, and that destination has a name: María Corina Machado. To the administration, the destination is still undefined. This is not indecision, it is a philosophical divide. Is the priority control or consent? Because how you answer that question determines everything that follows. And to understand why this divide exists, we have to go back. For years, Venezuela has lived inside a loop: crisis, collapse, control. The roots are not sudden, they are systemic. Power concentrated under Hugo Chavez, institutions hollowed out slowly, elections kept, but meaning drained. By the time Nicolas Maduro took over, the system no longer needed legitimacy, it needed survival. Oil revenues collapsed, sanctions tightened, the state turned inward. Opposition leaders were exiled, silenced, or blocked, not all at once, but methodically. This is why figures like María Corina Machado became symbols, not because they controlled territory, but because they preserved an idea. Meanwhile, the United States learned a hard lesson from history. Toppling regimes is fast, building democracies is slow, so Washington began thinking in phases. Security first, politics later. Florida Republicans never accepted that sequence. To them, legitimacy cannot wait. And when those two timelines collide, crises are born. That collision is about to erupt. The moment came fast, almost too fast. Within hours of Maduro being removed, the vacuum appeared. No celebration lasted long, because power hates emptiness. President Trump spoke to reporters, and then he hesitated, publicly questioning whether María Corina Machado had real support inside Venezuela. That single sentence landed like a shockwave. In Florida, alarms went off. Lawmakers who had backed every step of the operation suddenly realized something. The military phase was over. The political phase had begun, and it was slipping out of alignment. On Capitol Hill, Mario Diaz-Balart interrupted a reporter mid-question. Not defensively, urgently. We have been consistent from day one. To him, to Maria Salazar, to Rick Scott, this was not ambiguity. It was risk. Because transitions fail not when dictators fall, but when allies disagree on who comes next. If clarity disappears now, the entire operation changes meaning. This is the moment where viewers usually ask, Was this about democracy or control? Stay with me, because the real mechanics haven't even surfaced yet. Power transitions don't collapse in public. They fail quietly, behind closed doors, through procedures, through temporary arrangements that never end. This is the mechanism now at work in Venezuela. When a regime falls, three forces compete immediately: security, administration, legitimacy. The White House is prioritizing the first two: keep institutions running, prevent chaos, avoid bloodshed. That logic elevates interim actors, caretakers, people who can hold the state together. But caretakers don't inspire nations. Florida Republicans understand a different mechanism. Legitimacy is not administrative, it is emotional. People follow symbols before systems. That is why María Corina Machado matters, not because she controls ministries, but because she represents choice. Delay legitimacy too long, and the interim becomes permanent. History is full of temporary governments that never left. This is the hidden risk. Not dictatorship returning overnight, but democracy dissolving slowly. And as this mechanism grinds forward, pressure begins to build elsewhere. Because the next crisis won't be diplomatic. It will be human. Pressure always finds a release, and in Venezuela it won't come from speeches. It will come from people. Weeks into the transition, tension tightens, not in palaces, in streets. Uncertainty spreads faster than fear. Who is in charge? For how long? And toward what end? Interim authority begins to test its limits. Security forces hesitate, orders blur. This is the second crisis. Not explosive, but corrosive. Supporters of the opposition expect momentum. They expect movement toward elections, toward recognition. Instead, they see delay. And delay in fragile states feels like betrayal. The White House calls it stabilization. Florida Republicans call it drift, because every day without clarity reshapes reality. New actors gain influence, old habits return quietly. The longer legitimacy is postponed, the harder it becomes to restore. This is the danger zone, where revolutions lose their purpose, and as the state negotiates with itself, ordinary Venezuelans absorb the cost. That story is next. If you live far away, transitions look abstract, strategic, necessary, but if you are there, they feel personal. If you are a Venezuelan watching this unfold, you are not debating theory. You are waiting for wages to stabilize, waiting for food prices to stop jumping, waiting to know whether hope has a timetable. You hear foreign leaders speak of process, you hear lawmakers argue about legitimacy, but your life remains suspended. This is why clarity matters. For you, democracy is not a slogan, it is predictability. It is the ability to plan a month ahead, and every delayed decision lands on your shoulders. This is where María Corina Machado becomes more than a politician. She becomes a signal, a sign that the chaos has a direction. Without that signal, people disengage, or worse, they accept whatever authority promises stability. If this story resonates with you, don't look away. Stories like this don't end suddenly. They drift, and that drift doesn't stop at borders, because what happens next affects far more than Venezuela. Venezuela never exists in isolation. It never has. What happens in Caracas ripples outward, across borders, across ideologies. For Latin America, this transition is a test case. If a US-backed intervention removes a dictator but stalls on democracy, others will notice. Allies will hesitate. Strong men will adapt. For Washington, credibility is on the line. Not military credibility. That was proven. Political credibility. Because if legitimacy is delayed here, every future intervention becomes harder to justify. Meanwhile, rivals watch closely. They study the gap between force and follow-through, between removal and renewal. A prolonged interim in Venezuela sends a quiet message: power can change hands without truly changing systems. And that message travels fast. This is why Florida Republicans are so insistent. They are not thinking locally, they are thinking structurally. Who defines the post-Maduro order will shape how democracy is perceived far beyond Venezuela. This is no longer about one leader or one country. It is about whether transitions still mean transformation. And that brings us to the future. The future now splits three ways, and none of them are theoretical. Scenario 1, clarity. The transition accelerates. Elections are scheduled. Legitimacy is named, not implied. In this path, María Corina Machado becomes the political anchor, not by force, but by recognition. The state stabilizes because people believe in where it's going. Scenario 2, managed ambiguity. The interim stretches. Caretakers remain. Decisions are postponed in the name of caution. Stability exists, but enthusiasm fades. Democracy survives on paper, while energy drains from the streets. Scenario 3, drift. No clear leadership, no timetable. Power reconcentrates quietly, not under a dictator, under a system that learned how to wait. This is the most dangerous outcome, because it looks calm. History tells us something uncomfortable. Transitions don't fail from resistance alone. They fail from hesitation. The choice now is not dramatic. It is administrative, procedural, and yet it will define Venezuela for a generation. That final choice is what we need to confront. This is the paradox of power. Removing a ruler feels like victory. Designing what follows determines whether it was one. Nicolás Maduro is gone. That chapter is closed. But the harder chapter is open. President Donald Trump proved that force can change reality fast. Now the question is whether clarity can keep it changed. Florida Republicans understand something history teaches again and again. Transitions succeed when legitimacy arrives early, not after stability, not after convenience, because democracy delayed often becomes democracy denied. María Corina Machado is not just a person in this story. She is a test of whether power will trust the people or manage them. What happens in Venezuela will echo beyond its borders into future interventions, future promises, future faith in democratic transitions. If you want to keep following where this story leads, pay attention to who is named and who is avoided, because silence at moments like this is a decision. If this analysis helped you see the system more clearly, share it, stay engaged. The next chapter hasn't been written yet, but it's already being decided.